but they didn't get into like, oh, what an APR is, what that means if you miss a payment. Now you've gone from like 6% on your credit card to, whatever, 29%, however much they used to jack it up, and
Yes.
how that makes a huge difference and how much more you're paying for over time for this item that you got, and how much more expensive it winds up being.
On this episode of the Harness the Power of Planning podcast, Natasha and I talk about advice that we would give our younger selves. And this is the topic only portion of podcast episode number 74, starting now.
Happy Thursday. I'm Natasha.
I'm Alegre, and together we are Beyond Your Wildest Dreams.
And welcome to our Thursday chat. We do this every month. I said, welcome to our Thursday chat. We do this every month. You can tell I've only taken 2 sips of coffee so far today. We pop on here and we chat a little bit, and then we have our topic. And it's usually centered around planning, parenting, and always the mission is to help you prioritize yourself, save time, and achieve your goals. And that is what BYWD is all about. And that's what we're here to chat about today.
Okay, so today's topic is advice we would give our younger selves.
Talk about preparedness. Talk about 2020 hindsight preparedness.
Yes. And I guess another way of thinking about advice we'd give our younger selves is advice we would give our kids.
Right? 100%. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But somehow the question falls a little differently when you think about your younger self. I guess you got a little more specific. Like you really should have said yes to that opportunity.
Totally. Right. So it's not universal per se, but I was thinking about that, when you pick the topic, and I was, thinking about so what would I tell myself, like on a more like universal scale, and I think we've touched on this many podcasts ago or many chats ago, just better financial literacy earlier on. Right. So we've talked about how please take one of these civic classes and pitch it and teach kids, even just a semester of personal finance and how things work like that. I wish I had understood better that making a late payment on your credit card really makes a difference, right? And often I'd have the money to make the payment. It's not like I didn't have the money, but I just kind of was like, oh, I'm a couple days late, and not recognizing that makes a difference. You know what I mean? That kind of thing, not realizing oh, every time you pay on time, that really helps your credit. Oh, every time you pay a little more than the minimum, that helps you pay it down faster. I just didn't have a fuller scope of what that was. The extent of the financial literacy that my parents gave me was hey, here's how you write a check and balance a checkbook. Cool. That's not even relevant anymore. You know what I mean?
Right.
But they didn't get into oh, what an APR is, what that means if you miss a payment. Now you've gone from 6% on your credit card to, whatever, 29%, however much they used to jack it up, and how that makes a huge difference and how much more you're paying for over time for this item that you got, and how much more expensive it winds up being. Having that understanding earlier and how that would help me build my credit, which would help me later for purchasing bigger things, that would have been so helpful. And I'm talking to the US education system right now.
Absolutely.
Let's give the kids some real world. Yes, geometry is important. Algebras. Yeah, sure. But a semester, we can keep it. We can dedicate a semester of personal finance, because man, that would have been super helpful.
And I do think it's available now in LAUSD, in our public school system. I do think it's available now as an optional math class once you've completed
all your requirements.
The requirement math classes. That's what I've been told. I haven't investigated this, but that's a cool thing. So check it out. It might be a good reason to encourage your kid to do algebra freshman year rather than sophomore year, because I think that's how you can do it.
You can. And they probably offer it as a summer school class, but do things in summer school. I did, when my son was younger, have my kid take an outside class, but he was so much younger that I don't think that he really dropped it in fully.
Yes.
Plus, and it just, it's just a whole nother animal when they're a little bit older and they have a little bit more understanding of what money really is. He was maybe in 4th grade, and we did it a Saturday class, several Saturdays in a row, which he enjoyed, but I don't know. He probably couldn't tell you anything he learned in that class today. So
I love that. Financial literacy. That's a great one.
Yeah, that would have been helpful.
So I think my first advice I'd give my younger self is to take advantage of unique opportunities. And I heard this saying recently that really resonated with me, which is that when you're young, the rare seems regular.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning when you get a rare opportunity when you're young, you're like, oh, I'll pick that up next time it comes around.
Right.
And it doesn't come back around.
You just think that like, oh, this is just my life, right? People are just giving me all these opportunities. This is just how my life goes.
Yes. And so there definitely been opportunities I said no to that I wish I hadn't said no to. And 100%. So that is a big one. And that's definitely something I say to my kiddo, hey, this is a unique opportunity. I don't think you should pass this up. It might not come around again. I know you think it will, but from experience, I can tell you it probably will.
Right. And if it does, great. But hey, take it. Yeah, that's such great advice. I can't tell you how many times I've looked back and been like, oh wow, I really thought that would come around again when I was ready.
When you were ready,
when you're ready, or in a different place, or whatever. Yeah, that's really good advice. I mean, and
I can also tell you with 50 years of experience that I've never regretted anything I've done. I've only regretted things I haven't done. So
even things that don't work out, right? So you took that opportunity, it didn't quite work out, but that's okay. You learned stuff from it for sure. You also kind of learned like, okay, that kind of opportunity in this particular way is not right for me. But you never regret taking it. I agree. Like I still think about things that like my initial instinct was like, ooh, go for it. Yeah, I still like I would kind of bubble this out or ripple this out a little bit more from that advice of like following my instincts a little bit more. Now when you're younger, your instincts aren't necessarily always spot on, right? But you get this feeling like, oh yes, like an impulse like that. And I've talked myself out of that impulse so many times. Like, and I don't mean like, oh, buy those red shoes. Like, oh, I want to get, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like my instinct was, I always use this example. Like I was in this really low level singing competition. It wasn't really anything. It wasn't high stakes, but I think about it all the time because it was just a really good example for me of not following my instinct. Right. So it was one of those things where it was the very, very last competition. It was down to 3 people. And the song choice, I chose a song that was like the safe choice because they didn't let you practice. You just had to go and sing it. Right. You weren't allowed to practice. And this other song choice I had that I was like, oh, I think I could nail it, but I've never really sung it before. And I'm not really sure. And I asked if I could practice it. They're like, sorry, we don't have practice time for that. You just got to go. So I took the safe choice and the safe choice was good, but I wound up tying with the other person. And then we swapped songs. That was how they figured they said, you sing his song, he sings your song, and then people will vote. Right. But I went a few weeks later to a karaoke bar and picked the song out that I originally had this like, oh, I think I could kill it. And I killed it. You know what I mean? And I was like, So that wasn't a high stakes thing, but
and then the judge from the competition was in the audience and said, if you had sung that, you would have won.
Again, it wasn't high stakes, but it's just reminding myself, I'm like, you have good instincts. Don't talk yourself out of them. Like that first impulse is, often the right thing. And I think that out of fear or out of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be judged or whatever, go for it, really. Cause like so much, I think that's, that's kind of wrapped up in a few things where it's just like A, follow your instinct, and B, don't talk yourself out of it because of the way you think you might look to people, or it might, it might seem too much or too greedy. I think this could be maybe not uniquely, but I think women are often like, oh gosh, how's that going to look if I really go for it? Too ambitious, too, I don't know, thinks too much of herself or whatever. But, that instinct often really works out, and man, I've talked myself out of too many good things. Really. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. So, the next piece of advice that I would give my younger self is I'm not a big TMI person in terms of like, I don't really think there is such a thing as TMI if it's, helpful and useful information. So my sex talk was given to me by my dad one time when I was in high school on the drive from home to school. So it's approximately 22 minutes of my life was the sex talk by my dad. So I'm already like, my dad's giving me a sex talk. Like, this is very uncomfortable.
The worst.
And the message that he left me with was, don't get pregnant. And
that sounds like a dad's number one concern. Yeah.
Well, and in my mind, I was like, well, that's what condoms are for. And so, I know his goal was like, don't have sex. And I heard, make sure you don't get pregnant. And I already knew that there were these things called birth control, and anyway. So, and by the way, PSA, condoms work. I've only taken one pregnancy test in my life, and she is now 14 because condoms work. So anyway, what I would wish someone had said to me was telling me more about the emotional baggage of physical intimacy. Because if my parents' goal had been for me to be more thoughtful around my physical the partners that I was intimate with, and maybe delay my experience, I think if they had said, hey, when you're intimate with someone, it's emotionally heavy. And, there's so much science that backs it up. Like, you can't control the fact that oxytocin is released when you are intimate with someone. And intimacy is simple as hugging, right? And oxytocin just binds you to that person emotionally. And the question is, do you want to be bound to that person emotionally? And no one was asking me those questions. Like, is that someone you want to be bound with emotionally? Like, they don't seem to have their stuff together, or they don't seem very stable, or they don't seem to treat you well, whatever it is. I wish they had talked to me about the emotional toll. And I don't think they knew it. So I don't think they could have spoken about it.
But this is advice to your younger self, right? So
exactly. Advice to my younger self, and advice that I've absolutely already started giving to my kiddo, because there's so much brain science. And as you know, if you listened to this before, Natasha and I are big brain science nerds. There's so much brain science about how physical intimacy affects the brain, especially the female brain. And there's also a lot of science behind the fact that when you engage in, it's called comprehensive sex education. And there are Northern European countries that are big advocates for comprehensive sex education. And if you want to find out more about that, there's a great book called Beyond the Birds and the Bees that I highly recommend. I'll find the thingy for it so that the QR code, so you can look it up. But they have shown that comprehensive sex education reduces domestic violence, delays first sexual experiences, increases the benefit, the satisfaction with first sexual experiences, reduces pregnancy,
STDs, all the things. Yeah, I'm sure that there's much less of those things. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So that's advice I would have given my younger self, and it's absolutely advice that I give my kiddo.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Yeah, I got that. At least you got it on the way to high school. I got it on a break on my freshman year of college. I was like, you're a little late. Like,
oh my goodness.
Like, yes. Can you believe it? Because my mom was like, well, now you have a college boyfriend. So now we're going to, excuse me. That's talking about closing the barn door after the horse has left the barn. I was like, okay, Mom. There's no way my dad would have had that conversation. So your dad's way more progressive than my dad never would have never had that conversation. But yeah, we started talking about that much earlier than when I was a kid, much earlier with my boys. Yeah. Important. And of course, consent and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Excuse me. So that's some really great advice as well. Yeah. Pardon me. I'm going to mute myself because I have a little something I'm going to cough.
That's okay. I was actually going to wrap it up because it is the end of our time for this week. So thank you for joining us this week. And next week, we're actually going to be talking about coming up with a game plan for the holidays. We wrote a book called Rock Your Holidays. You can see it right there on the screen. There's the QR code.
Only $8 right now, you guys. And it really makes $8 well invested because, it's October. We're coming into that holiday rush. It's not too early to think about of course, Halloween costumes, but you know, what's happening later this year, it's not too early to think about it.
Yes. And we're going to be talking about it next week, having a holiday game plan, because the whole reason we wrote Rock Your Holidays is so that, you know, parents, moms, often we are the ones who are in charge of making the magic. And many of us enjoy that, but in charge of making the magic for the season. However, we also believe that you all are worthy of experiencing the magic as well. And we know that when you do a little bit of planning, you can ensure that both things are happening, and that's what Rock Your Holidays is all about.
Yeah, so join us for that next week. You'll definitely get some good tips to reduce your stress and increase your joy around it. We'd love to hear what you wish you could tell your younger self. So pop that into the comments too. We read all that. We'd love to hear what your advice is. I'm sure there's really good advice out there for your younger self. So feel free to do that, please.
Yes, thanks for joining us.
Dream wild, wild dreamer. Thanks for joining us for the Harness the Power of Planning podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you listen.